The sound of the chair being pulled away was nothing compared to the sound of the silence that followed. As I lay on the cold marble floor of my own daughter's wedding reception, my future son-in-law sneered down at me. "Your place is on the floor," he said. He thought he had won. He didn't know his own father, standing just feet away, was about to change everything. This is a story about how dignity is earned, not bought. If you believe true justice comes from intelligence, not shouting, hit that like button. The grease under my fingernails is a stubborn kind of black. It's not just dirt, it's a map of 1,000 bolts tightened and engines brought back to life. A history that no amount of orange-scented, grit-infused soap can ever fully erase. I'd been scrubbing them raw for a good 20 minutes, standing over the utility sink in the corner of the garage, but the fine lines of my knuckles and the beds of my nails still held the faint, dark story of my week's work, of my life's work. Really, hanging on a clean hook on the back of the garage door was the suit. It looked profoundly alien in here, a slick, dark gray ghost surrounded by the familiar, comforting clutter of wrenches hanging in neat rows, oil pans stacked in a corner, and the faint, sharp, almost sweet smell of gasoline that always clung to the air. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I'd owned since my wife, Sarah, passed away 15 years ago. It felt less like my suit and more like a costume for a part I hadn't auditioned for. I ran a hand over the smooth, cool fabric of the sleeve, then looked back at my own calloused palm. The two textures, the two worlds, didn't belong to each other. My eyes drifted to a far corner of the garage, past the hulking frame of a half-restored 2069 Mustang that was my long-term passion project, to a small wooden stool. It was barely a foot high. The pine scuffed and darkened with decades of age and oil stains. I could still feel the phantom sensation of the wood under my hands 30 years ago. Carefully sanding down the edges so they wouldn't leave splinters in a little girl's soft skin. Vivian had been 5. All bright, curious eyes, and a laugh that could fill the whole garage and spill out into the yard. She'd sit on that stool for hours, a tiny, chattering shadow, passing me tools that were often too big for her hands while I worked. "Need the big one, Daddy?" she'd ask, holding up a socket wrench that was half her size. That stool, more than anything else in the world, felt like something I had built right. It was a testament to a time when her world was small enough to fit inside this garage. Right beside me. A few hours later, I was on the road. The old Ford F-150, rattling reassuringly as it ate up the miles on the highway. The suit felt stiff and foreign around my shoulders, the seatbelt pulling it tight across my chest. On the passenger seat, wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with a plain string, was my wedding gift for Vivian. It wasn't a check with a lot of zeros or some fancy, high-tech kitchen appliance that would be obsolete in a year. It was a photo album, its leather cover embossed with her initials by a local craftsman. Inside, I'd spent weeks carefully arranging pictures. From her first day of kindergarten with a missing front tooth, to the day she got her driver's license. Her face a mixture of terror and triumph. On the back of each photo, I had handwritten a memory, a small story only she and I would understand. It felt small and hopelessly insignificant compared to the world she was marrying into. But it was real. It was us. The directions on my phone led me out of the city, away from the familiar grid of streets and workshops, and into a part of Cleveland I'd only ever seen in magazines. The houses got bigger, set further and further back from the road behind imposing iron gates and perfectly manicured lawns that looked like green velvet. Finally, I saw it. The Sterling estate wasn't a house, it was a statement. A sprawling stone mansion that looked like it had been airlifted from the English countryside and dropped into the middle of Ohio. Cars far shinier and more expensive than mine. Porsches. Bentleys. A Rolls-Royce lined the long, winding driveway. I found a spot at the very end, pulling my old truck in next to a gleaming black Mercedes, feeling like a tugboat docking next to a cruise ship. I killed the engine and sat for a moment. The familiar rumble replaced by a silence that felt heavy and judgmental. Inside, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. It was a symphony of clinking champagne flutes, polite, muted laughter, and the soft, elegant strains of a string quartet playing somewhere out on a terrace overlooking a garden that seemed to stretch for miles. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in dresses that shimmered like jewels drifted through rooms filled with imposing art and flowers so perfect they didn't look real. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the feeling of being an outsider looking in. A man made of grease and iron in a world of silk and champagne. I saw Vivian across the room, a vision in white, surrounded by a circle of smiling, predatory-looking women. She was radiant, beautiful, but she looked like she belonged here. In this world of polished surfaces and quiet, effortless money. When she finally saw me, her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself and made her way over. "Dad, I'm so glad you made it." She gave me a quick, careful hug, her body stiff, mindful of her dress and the elaborate architecture of her hair. It wasn't the kind of hug she used to give me, the kind that nearly knocked the wind out of me. "You look beautiful, Viv, just like your mother." A flicker of something real sadness. Maybe memory crossed her face before it was smoothed over again. "Try to mingle. Okay, have a good time." She gave my arm a little, nervous squeeze, and then was gone, swept back into the glittering crowd like a leaf in a current. That's when he appeared, materializing at her side as if summoned. Jasper Sterling, my future son-in-law. He was tall, with the kind of easy, predatory confidence that money buys. His tuxedo probably cost more than my truck's engine. He extended a hand, but his eyes weren't on mine. They were busy scanning my own off-the-rack suit. A faint, dismissive curl to his lip that he didn't bother to hide. His handshake was brief and limp, a formality he clearly wanted over with as quickly as possible. "Welcome, Mr. Callahan. Glad you could make it." He never called me Jace. It was always Mr. A. Callahan. Formal, distant, a way of keeping me at arm's length, of reminding me of my place. "Jasper, it's a beautiful wedding. You've done well by her." "We do our best," he said, the "we" hanging in the air. A clear line drawn between his family and me. He gestured vaguely at the splendor around them with a flute of champagne. "Hope you don't feel too out of your element." The subtext was as clear as a freshly cleaned window. "You don't belong here." The ceremony was a blur of words I couldn't quite hold on to. Held under a massive white tent in the garden, I just watched my daughter, my little girl who used to sit on that wooden stool, as she said I do to a man I didn't trust. I saw the way he held her hand, more like a possession than a partner. I saw the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. After the vows, we moved into the grand ballroom for the reception. Tables were draped in heavy white linen, each with a towering floral centerpiece that must have cost a fortune. A server, in a crisp uniform, directed me to the head table, where a single chair was reserved right next to Vivian. marked with a small, elegant card that read, "Father of the Bride." A small, warm feeling spread through my chest. A tiny island of relief. A place of honor. Dinner was served. A multi-course affair with food I couldn't pronounce. Speeches were made, filled with inside jokes and stories about Ivy League schools and summers in the Hamptons. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was one of Jasper's groomsmen, a carbon copy of him in a matching tux, motioning for me to stand for a toast. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly on the polished floor. I raised my glass with everyone else and listened to a story about Jasper's antics in college. When it was over, I turned to sit back down, and the chair was gone. For a split second, my mind didn't register it. My body, however, already knew. It was halfway through the familiar, unconscious motion of sitting, expecting the solid support that wasn't there. I flailed, my hands grasping at empty air as my center of gravity gave way. I crashed downwards. The impact was brutal. My hip took the brunt of it, sending a shockwave of white-hot pain up my spine. The sound was obscene in the opulent room, not a loud bang, but a dull, heavy thud of flesh and bone against unforgiving marble. The world went silent. The music, the chatter, the clinking of forks, it all just stopped. As if a switch had been flipped, 100 pairs of eyes turned to me. The old man sprawled on the floor like a sack of potatoes. And then, a few scattered titters of laughter, quickly stifled, but sharp enough to cut like glass. My face burned hot. A wave of humiliation so intense, it made my vision swim. I didn't look at Vivian. I couldn't. I looked up at Jasper, who was standing right where my chair had been. He was holding it, casually, by its back, as if he'd just been admiring the craftsmanship. A cruel, triumphant smirk played on his lips. He leaned down, his voice a low sneer, meant only for the few people at the table, but somehow seeming to echo in the crushing silence. "Your place is on the floor." I didn't say anything. I didn't shout or curse. The mechanic, the soldier I used to be, just took over. You assess the damage. You figure out the mechanics of the problem. And you get up. I pushed myself onto my hands and knees, the pain in my hips screaming in protest. I could feel Vivian's horrified gaze on me. But she was frozen, silent, a beautiful statue in a white dress. As I slowly, deliberately, got to my feet, brushing the invisible dust from my suit, a new figure entered the ballroom. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a posture as straight and unyielding as an iron rod. He had the same sharp jawline as Jasper, but his eyes held a weight and a seriousness that his sons utterly lacked. This had to be Arthur Sterling, Jasper's father. He'd been delayed on business. I'd heard. He stopped dead just inside the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. In an instant, me, standing awkwardly beside the table, his son, holding a chair with a smug look on his face, and the entire room watching. His gaze settled on me, and his face changed. The polite confusion of a guest arriving late melted away. It was replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Then a flicker of something I hadn't seen directed at me in decades: recognition. Deep, profound recognition that bordered on awe. He ignored his son completely. He ignored the bride. He walked directly toward me, his expensive leather shoes making soft, purposeful sounds on the marble floor. The room remained silent, utterly captivated by this new, bizarre turn of events. He stopped a few feet in front of me, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for a ghost from a long-forgotten war. He spoke, his voice, a low, trembling whisper that still managed to cut through the stillness of the entire hall. "Sergeant Callahan, is that really you?" The name hung in the air, heavy and strange. Sergeant Callahan. It was a ghost from another lifetime. A title I hadn't heard spoken aloud in over 30 years. For a moment, I felt a disorienting lurch, as if the polished marble floor of the ballroom had shifted back to the dusty, sun-baked earth of a training field. Jasper stared at his father, his mouth slightly agape. The smugness on his face had evaporated, replaced by a look of utter, bewildered confusion. He looked from his father to me and back again, as if trying to solve a complex equation that had suddenly appeared in front of him. Vivian was equally stunned, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. The entire room was a tableau of suspended animation. 100 wealthy guests, waiting for the next line in a play they didn't understand. Arthur Sterling took another step closer, his eyes, sharp and clear, never leaving mine. They were the eyes of a commander, trained to assess a man in an instant. "It is you," he said, his voice no longer a whisper but a statement of fact, filled with a respect that was so profound it felt like a physical force in the room. "I'd heard you'd settled in Cleveland after you mustered out. I never imagined." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the opulent chaos. I finally found my voice, keeping it low and even. "It's just Jace now. Arthur. A long time ago." He shook his head, a small, firm motion. "It's always Sergeant to me. You were the finest man I ever served with." He then turned, and for the first time, acknowledged his son. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a chilling disappointment. "Jasper, what is the meaning of this? Why was Sergeant Callahan on the floor?" Jasper sputtered, his arrogance scrambling to reassert itself. "Dad, it was just a joke, a little wedding prank. We were just having some fun." Arthur's gaze was like ice. It didn't look like he was having fun. It looked like you humiliated a guest. It looked like you humiliated the bride's father. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it was absolute. He turned back to me, his expression softening. "My deepest apologies, Sergeant, for my sons. Deplorable behavior." He then took the chair from Jasper's limp grasp, inspected it as if for flaws, and placed it firmly on the floor beside me. "Please." I gave a short, single nod and sat down. The pain in my hip was a dull, throbbing ache, but I ignored it. I didn't look at Jasper. I didn't look at Vivian. I just picked up my fork and stared at the half-eaten piece of salmon on my plate as the wedding reception slowly, awkwardly, tried to restart around the crater of silence Arthur Sterling had created. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. The music started again. Too loud now. People talked and laughed, but their eyes kept flicking towards our table. Jasper was sullen and silent, shooting me venomous looks whenever he thought his father wasn't watching. Vivian tried to pretend nothing had happened, making brittle conversation with the guests on her other side. But I could see the tremor in her hands. The bond between us, already stretched thin, felt like it had been severed. When the time came for the father-daughter dance, she came over, her face pale. We moved across the floor mechanically, a foot of air between us. "Dad," she whispered, her voice tight. "Why did you have to make such a scene?" Before I could answer, the song was over, and she was gone, pulled away by Jasper. I didn't stay for the cake cutting. I just found Arthur, shook his hand, and walked out into the cool night air, the sound of the party fading behind me. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Vivian. I was in the garage, my hands deep in the engine of the Mustang, and the familiar work was a comfort. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was unnaturally bright. "Hey, Viv, how was the honeymoon?" "Oh, it was amazing. So beautiful. Jasper sends his best." I doubted that. "Listen, about the wedding. I just wanted to call and clear the air. Jasper feels just terrible about what happened." I wiped a greasy hand on a rag. "Does he?" "Yes, he was just so stressed. You know, with the wedding and his father arriving late. It was just a stupid, clumsy joke that went wrong. He's really not like that." She sounded like she was reading from a script, her words rushing out too fast. I could almost hear Jasper in the background, coaching her. He told me my place was on the floor. "Vivian." I kept my voice quiet, just stating the fact. There was a pause. He'd been drinking. "Dad, you know how guys get. He's really sorry. He wants to make it up to you. To us. He wants to take you out for a proper dinner. Just the two of you. To talk things over. Man to man. A steakhouse. Of course. A place where he could perform. Surrounded by dark wood and expensive leather. A place designed to make a man like me feel small. It was another power play. Another test. But if I refused, he would tell Vivian I was the one holding a grudge, the one unwilling to forgive. He was already driving a wedge between us, and he was using her as the hammer. "All right," I said, the word tasting like rust in my mouth. "Tell him I'll go." The restaurant was the kind of place where the steaks have names and the wine list is thicker than a phone book. A valet, a kid half my age, looked at my F-150 with a barely concealed smirk before taking the keys. Inside, it was dark and smelled of money and cooked meat. Jasper was already there, sitting in a plush leather booth, a glass of dark liquor in his hand. He didn't get up when I arrived. "Mr. Callahan," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "Glad you could make it. Drink. Water's fine." He smirked and signaled the waiter. The meal was a monologue. For nearly 2 hours, Jasper talked without interruption. He talked about his portfolio, his plans to acquire a new tech startup, his frustration with the old guard on his father's board. He talked about the honeymoon in Bali, the 5-star resorts, the private beaches. He talked about the renovations they were planning for the house, a massive undertaking that would cost more than I'd made in the last 10 years. With every word, he was building a wall around my daughter, a wall made of money and influence, a wall I could never hope to scale. He repeatedly, subtly, belittled my life. "Vivian tells me you're still tinkering with old cars," he said, swirling his drink. "It's a nice hobby. Good to keep busy. You have to understand, though, Viv is in a different world now. She can't be dragged down by, well, by the past. Her future is about growth, expansion, not staying in one place." I just listened, cutting my steak into small, precise pieces. I ate slowly, methodically. I was a rock in the river of his words, letting them flow past me. Finally, when he had exhausted his own magnificence, he signaled for the check. The waiter brought it over in a small leather folder, and placed it in the middle of the table. Jasper picked it up, glanced at it, and then slid it deliberately across the table to my side. The bill was for over $300. "There," he said, leaning back with a satisfied look. "It's tradition. You know, the father-in-law always pays for the first reconciliation dinner. A gesture of goodwill to start things off on the right foot." My jaw tightened. This was the final move. The checkmate he'd been planning all evening. He expected me to argue, to be embarrassed, to admit I couldn't afford it. He wanted to see me squirm. I looked at the bill, then back at his smug face. I thought about the emergency credit card I kept in my wallet, the one I hadn't used in 5 years. I pulled out my wallet, took out the card, and placed it on top of the folder without a word. I didn't have to look at him to feel his surprise, his flicker of disappointment that I hadn't taken the bait. The waiter came and took it away. When he returned, I signed the slip, pushed the folder back to the middle of the table, and stood up. "Thank you for the dinner, Jasper." "Any time, Mr. Callahan." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving him sitting alone in his expensive booth. The valet brought my truck around. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I didn't feel angry. I felt a cold, heavy certainty. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about control. A week passed in silence. Then, late one night, I was in the garage, cleaning my tools before heading to bed, when the glare of powerful headlights flooded the driveway. A low-slung sports car, something European and angry-sounding, growled to a stop. The driver's side door flew open, and Jasper stumbled out. He was drunk, his tie loosened, his jacket gone. He stormed towards the open garage door, his face a mask of fury. "Callahan," he yelled, his voice slurring. He didn't wait for an invitation, just barged into my space, my sanctuary. The smell of whiskey rolled off him in waves. "What do you want?" Jasper asked, placing a heavy wrench on the workbench between us. "What did you say to him?" he demanded, jabbing a finger in my direction. "What did you say to my father? He's been asking questions, looking into my accounts. He's treating me like a damn child. This is your fault." "So?" Arthur had been looking. The seed of respect had borne the fruit of suspicion. "I haven't spoken to your father since the wedding," I said, which was the truth. "Liar," he spat. "You've been poisoning him against me, whispering your pathetic, blue-collar sob stories in his ear. You're trying to sabotage me." He took a step closer, his eyes wild. He was cornered. And like any cornered animal, he was becoming dangerous. "Listen to me, you old man," he snarled, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "You are going to stay out of my life. You are going to stay out of Vivian's life. If I hear that you've so much as spoken to my father again, I will make sure you never see your daughter again. I will take her so far away, bury her so deep in my world, that she'll forget your name. You will lose her forever. I will make sure of it." He stood there, breathing heavily, his chest puffed out, waiting for my fear, for my submission. But I wasn't afraid. In that moment, looking at this spoiled, enraged boy playing at being a man, all I felt was a profound clarity. He wasn't just a threat to my dignity anymore. He was a threat to my daughter. The promise I had made to Sarah at her bedside all those years ago echoed in my mind. I'll always protect her. I looked Jasper straight in the eye. My voice, when I spoke, was as quiet and as solid as the steel of the wrench on the bench. "You don't have that kind of power. Son, get out of my house." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for a weakness he couldn't find. With a final, frustrated curse, he turned and stormed out, peeling out of my driveway with a squeal of expensive tires. The silence he left behind was absolute. I stood there for a long time, the smell of burnt rubber hanging in the air. The line had been crossed. The choice had been made for me. Passivity was no longer an option. Protection required action. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. It took me less than 10 minutes to find what I was looking for, a business directory with a listing for Sterling Industries. I found the number for the executive office. I picked up my phone, my hand steady, and dialed. A polite, professional voice answered. Arthur Sterling's office. I took a breath. The plan was just a vague shape in my mind. But the first step was clear. "Yes," I said, my voice calm and formal. "This is Sergeant Jace Callahan. I'd like to speak with him. Please, tell him it's about the old days." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. The kind of professional silence where you can hear the gears of a corporate gatekeeper turning. A secretary, trained to deflect and defer, was likely running my name through a mental database of important contacts and coming up empty. "And what is this regarding Mr. Callahan?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "It's Sergeant Callahan." I corrected her gently. "Just tell him that. Tell him it's about the old days. He'll understand." Another pause. This one longer. I could picture her, weighing the absurdity of my request against the strange, specific instruction. I waited, listening to the quiet hum of the phone line. I was about to be told he was in a meeting, that I should leave a message, that my call would be returned at some indefinite future date. But then, there was a soft click. "Jace, is that you?" The voice was Arthur Sterling's, and it had bypassed the secretary entirely. The cautious, corporate tone was gone, replaced by a warmth and an energy that surprised me. It was the voice of a man who was genuinely pleased to hear from me. "It's me, Arthur," I said. "Good God. Man, after all these years, I was half convinced I'd dreamed you up at the wedding. How are you?" "I'm all right. And you?" "Busy," he said with a short laugh. "Always busy. What can I do for you?" "Sergeant, anything. You name it." The offer hung in the air. A blank check of influence and power. It was a test, in its own way. He was expecting me to ask for something, a job. A loan. A favor for Vivian. It was the language his world understood. I had to change the dialect. "I was hoping I could buy you a cup of coffee," I said. "Catch up properly. There's a diner I know. Quiet place." He hesitated. "A dinner, Jace. Let me take you to the club. We'll have a proper lunch. My treat." "I appreciate that, Arthur. I really do. But I'm more of a diner guy, and it's my treat. For old time's sake." I kept my tone light but firm. It was important to set the terms, to meet on my ground, not as a supplicant in his world, but as an equal from a world we had once shared. He was quiet for a moment, and I knew he understood. He was a smart man. That's how he'd survived in the Marines and thrived afterward. "All right, Sergeant," he said, a new note of respect in his voice. "Your ground. Your rules. You name the time and place. We met the next afternoon at a small, clean diner halfway between my house and the downtown skyscrapers where he worked. It was a place with vinyl booths, thick ceramic mugs, and a waitress who called everyone Hon. Arthur arrived dressed in a suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage. But he didn't seem out of place. He carried himself with an authority that was independent of his wealth. He slid into the booth opposite me and smiled. "This takes me back," he said, looking around. "Reminds me of those greasy spoons just off base." For the first hour, that's all we talked about. We were two old soldiers, falling back into the easy camaraderie of shared hardship. We talked about a grueling training exercise in the Mojave Desert, the biting cold of a winter drill in the mountains, the names and faces of men we hadn't seen in 3 decades. We spoke a language of acronyms and inside jokes that would have been meaningless to anyone else. In that booth, I wasn't a mechanic and he wasn't a CEO. We were just 2 Marines, equals, in a brotherhood forged by discipline and mutual respect. He remembered me as the sergeant who could strip down a rifle blindfolded faster than anyone in the platoon, the one whose quiet competence had saved his much younger Endadio Zed, much greener Lieutenant's hide more than once. As the waitress refilled our coffee for the 3rd time, I saw my opening. I skillfully pivoted the conversation, shifting the topic from past commands to present ones. It must be something, watching your own son step up and take on responsibility. I said, my tone, casual. You must be proud of Jasper. Him taking the lead on the family's charitable foundation. I framed it in terms we both understood, the language of a young officer taking on his first command. Arthur's expression shifted. A flicker of paternal pride was quickly overshadowed by a familiar weariness. Proud. Yes, but he's impatient. He wants to run before he's learned to walk. Thinks he knows better than the old guard. He's got big ideas. I'll give him that. I heard him talking about the new housing project. I continued, stirring my coffee. Building affordable homes out by the old industrial park. It's a noble cause. A big project for a young man to manage. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Out of curiosity, I looked up the public filings. You know me. Old habits die hard. Always checking the supply line. I saw his focus sharpen. This? He understood. Logistics. Supply lines. The nuts and bolts of an operation. I saw he's working with a new primary supplier for materials. I said, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. A company called Apex Solutions. It's a bold move. Picking a new company for such a critical role shows confidence. Arthur frowned slightly. Apex. Can't say I've heard of them. We have a list of preferred vendors we've worked with for years. Reliable people. He paused, thinking, but Jasper likes to make his own way, find his own people. The seed was planted. I didn't push it. We finished our coffee, paid the bill, and shook hands outside in the bright afternoon sun. It was good to see you, Sergeant, he said. Don't be a stranger. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove to the main branch of the public library downtown. It was a large, quiet building that felt safe and anonymous. I found a computer terminal in a secluded carrel and got to work. I didn't want this search history linked to my home. To me, it was an old instinct from my time in the service maintain operational security. It didn't take long. Public records on new businesses are easy enough to find if you know where to look. Apex Solutions, LLC had been registered just 3 months prior. The address was nothing more than a P.O. box. There was only one officer listed on the registration, a man named Todd Fleming. The name meant nothing to me, but it was a thread. I started pulling on it. A search for Todd Fleming's name brought up a slew of social media profiles. He was not a private person. His accounts were a public monument to a life of leisure and luxury. And in nearly every photo, he was standing next to Jasper Sterling. There they were on a yacht in the Caribbean, champagne bottles in hand. There they were, sitting courtside at a Cavs game. There they were, in a grainy older photo, arms around each other, wearing matching fraternity sweatshirts. The caption read, "Brothers for Life." I had it. The director of Jasper's new, inexperienced supplier company was his best friend and college fraternity brother. It was a conflict of interest so blatant, so arrogant, it was practically screaming to be discovered. This wasn't just a bold business move. This was Jasper funneling his family's charitable foundation money directly into his friend's pocket. And likely, his own. I waited a full day, letting that small seed of doubt I'd planted in Arthur's mind have time to sprout. Then, the following evening, I called his direct line. "Arthur, it's Jace Callahan. Sorry to bother you at home." "Never a bother." "Jace, what's on your mind?" I let a note of concern, of reluctance, enter my voice. "Something about that conversation we had has been bugging me. It's probably nothing, just an old sergeant's paranoia. But I thought you'd want to know." "What is it?" he asked, his voice now sharp with attention. "I looked up this Apex company," I said. "The director, this Todd Fleming kid. He was Jasper's roommate at Yale. They're all over the internet together. Like I said, it's probably just a coincidence. A young man helping out a friend. But for a charitable foundation, the optics of a no-bid contract to your best friend's brand new company. They aren't great. I just thought you should know. A flank left unguarded is a flank that gets hit." I presented the information not as an accusation against his son, but as a tactical observation from one old soldier to another. I was helping him see a vulnerability in his own lines. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight and cold. "Thank you, Jace. I appreciate the reconnaissance. I will handle this." He hung up. The trap was now baited. All I had to do was wait for the target to walk into it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The next evening, my phone rang. It was Vivian, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in a long time. "Dad, I have the most wonderful news. We've finally set a date for the official engagement party. It's going to be a huge gala at the country club. And it's a fundraiser for Jasper's new housing project. Isn't that amazing? He's doing so much good." My hand tightened on the phone. The stage. He was building his own stage. "It sounds wonderful, honey," I said, my voice even. "You have to be there. Dad, front and center. It's next Saturday. I'll send you the formal invitation. But I wanted to tell you myself. I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. After I hung up, I went back to the library. I printed everything. The business registration for Apex Solutions. A half-dozen photos of Jasper and Todd Fleming living their lavish life, time-stamped from the last few months. I printed the mission statement of the Sterling Family Foundation from their website, the one that spoke of transparency and community trust. I put all of it into a simple, clean manila envelope. No noches, no commentary, just the cold, hard facts. On the morning of the party, I called Arthur's office. I told his secretary I needed to drop something off for him. Something personal. I drove downtown and left the envelope with the concierge at his building. Marked with his name. My part in setting the trap was done. Now, it was up to Arthur. That evening, I put on the suit again. It didn't feel like a costume anymore. It felt like a uniform. I drove my truck to the country club. The same one where they wouldn't have even let me park a few years ago. The ballroom was even more extravagant than the wedding had been, dripping with crystal and silver. I took a glass of water from a passing waiter and stood near the back, watching. And then I saw him. Jasper was on a podium at the far end of the room. A microphone in his hand. A spotlight on his face. He was in his element, charming the wealthy crowd, accepting their applause, soaking in their admiration. He was the king in his castle, completely unaware that the walls were about to come crashing down around him. From a corner of the room, I saw Arthur watching his son, his face as hard and unforgiving as granite. In his hand, he was holding a manila envelope. The storm was here. Jasper stood on the podium, bathed in the warm, forgiving glow of a single spotlight. He held the microphone with a practiced ease, one hand in his pocket, looking every bit the young, charismatic philanthropist he was pretending to be. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. From my position near the back wall, I had a clear view of the entire scene, the sea of adoring, wealthy faces turned towards the stage. My daughter, Vivian, sitting at the head table, looking up at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride. And, in a shadowed corner near the side exit, Arthur Sterling, standing ramrod straight, his face a mask of cold fury. The manila envelope was a pale rectangle in his hand. And it's not just about building houses, Jasper was saying, his voice smooth and resonant, filling the cavernous ballroom. It's about building futures. It's about giving people a foundation, not just of concrete, but of hope. And that work requires partners who share our vision, partners who embody integrity and transparency in everything they do. He smiled, a wide, camera-ready smile that didn't touch his eyes. I felt a cold, steady calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before a mission, a strange quiet in the center of the storm. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited. I was just watching the final pieces of a machine I had set in motion as they began to move. I watched Vivian dab at the corner of her eye with a napkin. Completely captivated. She believed every word. She believed in him. And that was the part that hurt the most. Jasper raised his glass. So I ask you all to join me, to be generous tonight, and to help us build a better Cleveland, one family at a time. To the future. A wave of enthusiastic applause swept through the room as people reached for their checkbooks. Jasper basked in it, nodding graciously. The master of his universe. But his moment of triumph was short-lived. As the applause began to die down, a new sound emerged. The soft, deliberate click of expensive leather shoes on the polished dance floor. Arthur Sterling was moving. He walked from the shadows into the light. His steps unhurried, but filled with an undeniable purpose. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on his son. He walked right up to the side of the stage, and without a word, held out his hand for the microphone. Jasper's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed his face. "Dad, what are you doing?" he whispered, his hand covering the mic. Arthur didn't answer. He just waited, his hand outstretched, his expression unreadable. Reluctantly, Jasper handed it over. Arthur stepped up onto the podium next to his son. The room, which had started to buzz with conversation again, fell completely silent. This was not on the program. "Thank you, Jasper," Arthur said, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the ballroom. A very inspiring speech. "You speak eloquently about integrity and transparency. And as the chairman of the Sterling Foundation's board, I believe transparency should start at home." Jasper's face went rigid. He tried to smile, but it was a pained, unnatural grimace. I saw Vivian lean forward in her seat, her brow furrowed in confusion. "You mentioned your partners," Arthur continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "I was particularly interested in your choice for the primary materials supplier, a new company, I believe, Apex Solutions." At the mention of the name, Jasper's composure cracked. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A slight widening of his eyes, a tightening around his mouth. He was a cornered animal that had just heard the snap of a twig behind him. "Yes," Jasper said, his voice a little too loud. "Apex is a dynamic new player in the market. Eager, competitive. Exactly the kind of agile partner we need to get this project done under budget." "I'm sure," Arthur said smoothly. He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing every eye in the room to focus on his son's increasingly uncomfortable face. I was so impressed, in fact, that I took the liberty of looking into them myself. And I have a simple question. As part of our foundation's commitment to due diligence, can you explain to our generous donors tonight why you awarded an exclusive, multi-million-dollar, no-bid contract to a company that was founded less than 3 months ago, has no track record, and is run by your old college roommate, Todd Fleming?" A collective, soft gasp went through the room. It was a sound like the tide going out, leaving a sudden, stark silence in its wake. All the air had been sucked out of the ballroom. Jasper's face, which had been pale, was now slick with a thin sheen of sweat under the hot stage lights. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, for an ally. They met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them, I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. That's an outrageous accusation," he stammered, his voice losing its smooth, confident timbre. "Todd is a respected businessman. The contract was awarded on merit, on the strength of his proposal." "Was it?" Arthur asked, his voice still deceptively mild. He lifted the manila envelope, "Because the Foundation's financial records, which I reviewed this afternoon, tell a slightly different story. They tell a story of a $200,000 initial payment, authorized by you, to Apex Solutions for consulting and material pre-orders. Yet the project site has not even been broken. The materials have not been delivered. The money, it seems, has simply vanished, funneled from a charity for the poor into your best friend's pocket." This time, the silence was absolute. It was a crushing, physical weight. Jasper stood there, exposed. The spotlight that had been his friend, now a harsh, unforgiving interrogator's lamp. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a puppet with his strings cut. And then, he broke. His head snapped around, and he pointed a trembling finger, not at his father, but directly at me. Standing in the relative darkness at the back of the room, Him, he shrieked, his voice cracking. Raw and ugly. It was him, that old man. My wife's pathetic. Grease monkey father, he's been poisoning you against me. He's a jealous bitter old man who can't stand that his daughter has a better life. He made it all up. He's lying. The accusation was so wild. So desperate. It was a confession. In that moment, he ceased to be a charismatic philanthropist. He was just a spoiled, terrified child throwing a tantrum. But his words had the desired effect. Every head in the room swiveled to look at me. For a moment, I was the one in the spotlight. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just stood there and met their gaze. My expression calm. I let his madness speak for itself. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Vivian. I watched her face as Jasper's frantic play. Ugly words filled the room. I saw the initial shock, the instinctive defense of her fiancé rising in her eyes. I saw the confusion as she looked from Jasper's contorted, raging face to my still, quiet form. And then, I saw the dawning horror. I saw the memory of the wedding, of the pulled chair, of the sneer on his face. I saw the memory of the expensive dinner, of the condescension, of the manipulative conversations she had defended. I saw all the little red flags, all the tiny moments of cruelty and arrogance she had ignored, suddenly coalesce into a single, undeniable truth. The man on that stage was not the man she thought she was marrying. Her face crumpled. It was a slow, silent collapse. Her hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide with a pain that was so raw it felt like a physical blow. With a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, she looked down at her left hand. She stared at the massive diamond ring, the one that had been a symbol of her bright, secure future. And then, slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off her finger. She didn't throw it. She didn't make a scene. She just placed it gently on the white tablecloth, next to her untouched glass of champagne. It was a quiet, final gesture that was louder than all of Jasper's shouting. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of hushed, frantic whispers. The spell was broken. The illusion was shattered. I saw two large men in suits, the club's security, moving purposefully towards the stage. Arthur Sterling took the microphone from his son's limp hand. "This event is over," he announced, his voice like a gavel. "The Sterling Foundation will be launching a full, independent audit. All of tonight's donations will be returned." He then turned to his son, his face a mask of profound, weary disgust. "You are a disgrace to this family." Jasper was escorted off the stage, still muttering, still trying to blame me. But no one was listening anymore. Arthur stepped down and made his way through the stunned, parting crowd, directly to me. He stopped in front of me. The CEO and the mechanic, the two poles of this broken family. "I am sorry, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and heavy with a shame that was not his own. "I am truly sorry you had to be the one to see this." I just gave him a single, slow nod. There was nothing else to say. My attention was on my daughter. She was still sitting at the table, alone now, staring at the empty space on her finger. The crowd was giving her a wide berth, as if her heartbreak were contagious. I started walking towards her. The journey across that vast, ornate ballroom felt like it took a lifetime. The whispers quieted as I passed. I was no longer the invisible man. I was the father. I reached the table and stood beside her. She didn't look up. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched. then leaned into my touch. A small, shuddering sob escaping her lips. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say, are you okay? I didn't say anything at all for a long moment. I just stood there, a solid, familiar presence in the wreckage of her life. Finally, I leaned down, my voice quiet, meant only for her. Let's go home. Honey. She looked up at me then, her eyes swimming with tears and 1,000 questions, but she nodded. I helped her to her feet, and putting an arm around her shaking shoulders, I led my daughter out of that glittering ballroom, away from the wreckage, and back towards the small, quiet world where she had always been safe.